This personal story of mine is one that caused me to question my love for the outdoors. For what I saw out there, it still haunts me to this day, and sometimes on nights that are dark and still, I can see that thing, with its twisted grin and cackling chuckle. I feel like the only way to escape its memory is to share it, so I'm not the only one burdened with this. To start off, I loved the outdoors all through my childhood with a strong passion. And that's why when I had the chance to visit the Rocky Mountains in northern New Mexico with one of my friends, during the summer of my sophomore year in college, I jumped at the opportunity. For some more background info, my friend, who I'll call Jack, had some pretty wealthy parents, so he spent every summer traveling the world, going on backpacking trips which he, like me, loved to do. He went on backpacking trails that I could only dream to hike. He knew that I loved to backpack also, so he offered to pay for me to come along with him, knowing that there was no way I would be able to pay for it myself. This was a dream come true for me, because I grew up in the east coast of the United States, and never went further west than the Mississippi River, and I always wanted to backpack the Rockies. So, the school year ends, and I had been preparing to go on the trip, and about a week away from the start of it, my friend calls me with some bad news saying that his girlfriend got in a minor car accident, and that he's going to have to miss the trip. He did, however, say that I could go by myself if I still wanted to. My natural instincts told me that it would be stupid to go into the woods alone, especially in unfamiliar territory. However, this opportunity was too big to pass up, so I told him that I would. So I went without him, and I started off on the trailhead alone. In the days prior to my arrival, it had continually rained in the upper mountains. So I, being prepared for the weather, fastened on my rain gear and headed off along the stream-stricken trail. A few days later, I found myself lonely and wishing that Jack was there with me. The trip was supposed to last 2 full weeks, and it's only been 5 days, but I wanted to go home, even if it was my dream trip. I only saw 3 other people along the trail, and they were going in the opposite direction of me. Now I was thinking about calling it quits at the next stop in a small town that was 40 miles down the trail, because sure, I was seeing beautiful sights, but what was the point if I had no one to share them with? I wanted to get the 40 miles over with, so I continued to walk as the sun went down and hid behind the brisk mountaintops. It only took a few minutes for the darkness to creep upon me at the end of that day, but I, being determined to get home, continued on my journey with a headlamp. I didn't stop to eat dinner, so I just snacked down a beef jerky while I backpacked along. I figured that I had made a stupid mistake with trying to get a little further during that night, because now I was submerged in darkness. So I stopped where I was and I walked only 5 feet from the trail to set up my tent. I was supposed to camp a minimum of 50 feet off the main trail, but it was so dark, I decided to break that rule just for tonight. So I set up my tent and I laid down on my bed, while hiding my face in the sleeping bag. I then slowly drifted off to sleep, listening to the sounds of nature that surrounded me. Later on, the night turned to a cold and crisp breeze. I heard a rustling coming from the outside of my tent, and at the time, I thought it was nothing. And then I felt the tent shake a little, and heavy breathing with snorts could be heard. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and shivers ran up and down my legs. I tried to be as still as I possibly could, as to not draw any attention to myself. And then I heard nothing, like the world stopped turning. And out of nowhere, the tent was slit with a stripped gash. I tried to get out of my sleeping bag, but whatever it was now on top of me. I felt my bones on the brink of breaking due to the large weight. It felt like one large paw on the top of my back. The claws from it were slightly drawing blood from where they rested. I stayed as still as a rock, unmoving because my life depended on it. Whatever it was on top of me finally got off, but never completely left the area. I finally gathered enough courage that I peeked my head through the top of the sleeping bag and I looked at the destroyed remnants of my tent. I then heard the footsteps and I looked and beheld a giant grizzly bear that had its face in my bag looking for food. I then remembered that I forgot to tie my bag in the tree to keep bears and other animals from reaching it. I was just too tired that I forgot, and now that simple mistake may be the cause of my death. I knew not to move a muscle or to look the bear in the eyes, so I just stayed in my sleeping bag and demolished tent for the rest of the night, undetected by the bear. The sun finally dawned over the mountains. I had stayed up all night, terrified at the point that I was immovable due to the shock. I finally shook out of the trance and saw that the bear had moved on. My heart soared and I felt like a great burden was lifted off my back. But then I remembered about my backpack and my heart sunk. I got up and I examined the damage done closely. My bag was torn and supplies were scattered. I saw that all of my snacks and food were gone, and only crumbs with ripped wrappers were left. I did, however, rejoice when I saw that my water purifier was unbroken, so I would at least have clean water. I thought to myself that I may have survived the bear encounter, but without food or most of my supplies, I would be lucky to last at least 3 more days. I was now in the middle of the woods with no tent, no food, and really no hope. The backpacking trail was so long and rocky that most backpackers avoided it, so getting help from other people along the trail was very slim. Plus, even if I did run into other backpackers, they probably could not spare me much because in backpacking, you carry the bare minimum, so I knew I was in trouble. I scavenged what I could and fastened my pack back together with some chewed on twine. I then quickly got back onto the trail where I looked all around for campfire smoke or backpackers, but there was none to be seen. I gave up and just continued along the trail with my head hung low. But then there were footsteps coming from up the trail, and my hope soared. I ran to where the sounds were coming from, but to my amazement, there was no one there. So I then turned around and began to walk, but then noticed a slim, pale man standing on the trail only 10 yards away. I was surprised on how he snuck up on me, but I didn't care because now I had hope, so I talked excitedly while walking towards him saying, "I was attacked by a bear and I lost all of my food and some supplies, and I was wondering if I could." I stopped mid-sentence. My inside seemed to twist with a sickening feeling, and I felt that something was off about him. The man just stood there looking at me for a moment and then answered in a low-toned, scratchy voice. "My cabin is just on this hill next to the river. If you follow me, I can show you." The man said while he gestured down the hill. I had mixed feelings about following the man, but I had no other choice, so I overruled my better judgment and I followed. As we went down, the sky dimmed to darkness as if it was night. We went far off the trail, and I felt my legs fall numb, as if where I was going was ripping at my soul. But I didn't have time to think as we were already at the bottom of the hill. The man stopped walking and his head snapped 180 degrees, which put him face to face with me, and he stated poetically in a mangled voice, "The sky is night, though it is supposed to be bright, and the fear I can feel draws me near. You can't run nor hide, so give up your pride, and I shall blow away your strife by taking your life." As soon as I heard this, I knew I made a mistake by following him, and I broke out a straight sprint for the hill. But as I tried to climb it, the rock and dirt turned to brittle sand. The hill became steeper, and I could not climb it without sliding back down, because the fine sand provided no grip. I heard the man say again from the poem, "And the fear I can feel draws me near." He had a smile on his face that was like none other I had seen before. It was a pure, tantalizing evil. I then darted towards the river, but then suddenly it overflowed with muddy water, making it impossible to cross without drowning. I kept hearing that twisted poem replay in my mind. I backed away from the river, and I felt my shoulder bump something which caused me to turn around swiftly, and I turned to see the man standing right behind me. I then asked with my body trembling, "Who are you? What's going on?" The man then smiled as he disappeared in a pile of dust that scattered in the cold, uneven wind. I looked around, wondering where the man had left to, and I knew I couldn't escape because whatever I tried was blocked off. So I gave up and I curled up in a ball. I could hear the man's cackling screech-like chuckle, and it echoed in my ears like the sound of a gunshot. It was like he was everywhere, but nowhere all at once. I then stood up on my feet and was stuck to the ground with a hard blow to the chest. I tried to get up again, but the same thing happened, with much more force, knocking the wind out of my chest, and soon I could feel that burning sensation all over my body. I tried to scream out, but no matter how hard I tried, nothing came out as the thing had stolen the air from my lungs. I felt my ribs being squeezed and the air was being forced out of my body. A ring of fire formed around me, and the man appeared again. His eyes were red now, and his neck had markings around it that only could be formed by the fibers of a rope. And then the man pulled out a rope and fastened a knot into it right before he tossed it onto the ground. And then he snapped his fingers, and the rope immediately strung up on a tree that towered over me. All of this can end. All it takes is one little ride, the man said while gesturing at the rope that dangled above. My face scrunched as I yelled, "I will not kill myself because of you." "Oh, in that case, these next days will be quite an experience," the devilish man answered back. I then thought back onto the poem the man had sung, and I recalled the words. "And the fear I can feel draws me near." I thought of this and then thought that if I did not show any fear, the man would lose his power over me somehow. So, I began to stand the same way a bear would stand to protect her cubs. I cleared my thoughts and I stopped sweating. The man saw this and said while cackling, "You thought back into the poem, I see." The man's tone intensified as he continued. "You are a smart one, so it'll be fun to break you. You will fall like all the others before you." The man lifted his hands, which were now turning a reddish color, to the darkened sky where now there were trees full of hanging bodies. They swayed in the wind and were so close to each other that they would continually bump into one another. I did not flinch a muscle, for I was going to live through this to see my family and friends again. The man began to talk with a smirk on his face. "You're not scared of this. All of these hanging bodies are the ones who came before you. They are all mine now, and don't you think it's quite an impressive collection?" The devilish man looked up at the bodies and continued, "I did not kill a single one of them, but simply pushed them to the breaking point. The same way I'm going to push you." I broke the man's endless taunting. "I will not let you get into my head and cause me to spill my own blood." The sky lightened a bit, and the man's powers began to dwindle down. "You're fighting the fear which I impose upon you. You might be strong, but not strong enough for this." The man screeched as he seemed to glide through the air towards me, and the wind quickened. The man had his hands outstretched, and his skin began to peel off, revealing a black monster of indescribable hideousness. The flakes of his outer skin were picked up by the wind and turned to flames. "Do you fear me now?" the monster screamed, stopping only inches from my face. I held back the feelings of fear that so desperately wanted to come prying out. "I'm not scared of you anymore," I stated firmly, while directly staring into the creature's dead eyes. The beast grew into a rage, but then calmed down to where it bowed its head, and backed away from me, turning into black ashes, leaving only the sound of his cackle, which caused me to shake. Immediately as this happened, I fell to the dirt and passed out. I awoke in a tent, with sweat covering my entire body. I looked around me, and I had all of my food and gear but a nasty headache. I then said to myself with a sigh of relief, it was all a bad dream. That thing I saw doesn't and could not actually exist. I then packed my stuff just thinking about my dream. I got all ready to go and began to walk onward on the backpacking trail. Soon, I then started to pass the place in my dream where I met the man. It was strange. I had never seen this part of the trail before, but it exactly matches the trail in my dream. I shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued to walk, but my eyes wandered down to the place where I followed the man off the trail, and I saw something that chilled me straight down to my very core. I saw in the distance the exact same man from my dream, dead, hanging from a tree.